Now, Daniel L. Davis is a former lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, now senior fellow and military expert at the American think tank Defense Priorities, and host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Show on YouTube. He joins you now live from America. Thanks so much for taking the time. Good to talk to you again. What's your reaction to this coalition of the willingness? Hello.
Well, listen, I was listening to that your guest there was talking a minute ago, and I couldn't agree with him more. I mean, the real issue is not just what's the mission and what is the plan, but what the hell? I mean, if we're not willing to fight, we meaning the West general, whether it's Europe or the United States, if we're not willing to fight on behalf of Ukraine right now and haven't been for 4 years, by what logic would we want to do so in the future? If there is an engagement between Russia and Ukraine again, if this did, let's say that we got to some kind of an agreement, which to me seems very, very far away. But if we did, and we put this coalition of the willing there, and there are troops inside of Ukraine itself, and then all of a sudden this peace is broken, is Britain then ready to go to war with Russia, nuclear-armed Russia, knowing that they could potentially be on the receiving end of nuclear missiles, or France? I just don't understand why that even the governments want to pretend like that they would send their troops to die for Ukraine when they won't do it now. And they haven't done it up to this point. Nothing is going to change. It's going to make it a good calculation later when it hasn't been a good calculation up to this point. This probably will never come to pass because we're not going to get to an agreement based on the 20 points that are being kicked around right now. So it may just be a complete futility.
If there were NATO troops in Ukraine, if there were to be a ceasefire or peace treaty of some sort, do you think that might actually stop Vladimir Putin from having yet another attempt to capture more territories? Would it be a sufficient deterrent for him?
Well, listen, I think before you could even ask that hypothetical question, you got to answer the question that's in place of us right now, which is that from a position of considerable strength, and I'm talking about manpower strength, arms and weapons strength, and of course industrial strength on top of all that, why would they agree to anything short of their Maximus agreements of their terms right now? That's one of I think the biggest failure I've seen on the entire Western operation so far, and that is Europe, that is Ukraine, and frankly, it's the United States too, is that we keep looking for some kind of an outcome, some kind of a negotiated settlement that the side that's the strongest is going to agree to from a position of strength and give the side that's the weakest side something that they don't have to give, something that we would never do to a side that's on the weak side, much less a side that is on the strong side. So if we wouldn't make an agreement like this, why do we imagine that the Russians will? And I'm telling you, they won't.
Is there an argument, I mean, given what you said a few minutes ago, is there an argument to actually put troops in now to try and precipitate a peace through military might rather than diplomacy?
No, absolutely not. That would be near suicide on our part because we do not have the wherewithal. We don't have the industrial capacity. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the training. I'm telling you, as good as we think our troops are, and I'm including the United States in this, we are not anywhere near the place where you could engage in a conflict with Russia. And of course, the chances of it going nuclear are just off the charts if you start fighting conventionally with the West. So to do that would be to invite nuclear exchange. And so it would be suicidal for us to do so. There's no way we should take that risk.
You really believe that there is a credible risk of a nuclear exchange if other countries' troops get involved?
Here's where that would come into play. I would suggest that there is a greater chance that we would use and initiate nuclear weapons even than the Russians, because conventionally we are far, far weaker. And I'm talking everything from the number of troops, the type of training, and how we can sustain them with our industrial capacity is well known that it's about a third of what the Russian side has right now. And I'm talking all together. So if we fought conventionally, our side would start likely losing. And I can't imagine that Paris and London and Washington would allow our troops to be defeated and not use nuclear weapons. I just can't see that would happen. And if the converse started to happen somehow, if we found enough troops and political will or whatever, and the Russians started losing, then they would use nuclear weapons. That's the whole thing about mutually assured destruction and why these nations have nuclear weapons, so that they forestall a conventional defeat. And that's literally why we have them. So the idea that we would fight a conventional war and it not go to that just seems pretty unrealistic.
Well, I mean, it would be an astonishing turn of events, given, after all these decades, nuclear weapons have never been fired, and MAD has seemed to have worked. Look,
Indeed, it has.
It has, and I've always been a great, a great proponent of MAD. I think it works very well indeed, which is why I'm so concerned about what might happen to NATO in the event of Trump invading Greenland. But we'll park that for one moment. You said that boots on the ground wouldn't work, Daniel. What do we therefore need to do? And I say we, I mean, France, Germany, Britain, America.
Right.
What do we need? What do we need to do to support Ukraine?
I'll give you the honest answer, which is going to be an unpleasant answer, and nobody is going to want to hear this. But it's to get the best negotiated deal we can get on the terms that are at the hand right now, and take it. Because if we don't, and of course that means the 4 administrative borders of the oblast. That means some version of demilitarization. It means no NATO. All the things that are antithesis to what the Ukraine side wants, and they aren't willing to do. And that means all that territory. As bad as that would be, that is not as bad as continuing to pretend like we can have some sort of thing that will stop the Russians, because eventually they'll take more than just those 4 oblasts. And look, we had a chance in 2022 to have this negotiated settlement when it was only have been the Donbass, not Zaporizhia, not Kherson, but we didn't do that then. So every time we have refused to take the logical, rational military off-ramp, and especially after the 2023 failed offensive, that proved that the Ukraine side is just never going to be able to force out the Russians. But we didn't. And every time we refuse to take the off-ramp, the next one is worse. And if we don't take this one, there might not be another one other than terms of surrender. And even if that took another year or two, Russia has the manpower and the industrial capacity to do it. Ukraine doesn't.
Is Putin really so completely indestructible and unopposable? And if we were to do what you said and negotiate a settlement which would largely, I think, be in his favour, and he'd come away with quite a bit of Ukraine, including, of course, the Crimea, which he already held, doesn't that then set a precedent and give him the green light to go on and invade other countries like Georgia, Moldova, even Finland?
No, it doesn't. And here's the big reason why. This implies that this was all just territorial conquest from the beginning. But going back to 2007, even though we like to say it wasn't, it has always been about NATO in Ukraine and Georgia on the plains that lead straight to Moscow inside Russia. It was on their border. They have always said that's the main reason. That's what they offered to just take NATO off the table in 2021, take it off the table in 2022. We never did that because that's what they were looking for. They are not looking to conquer anything else. They don't even have the force structure to go and conquer those other places you're talking about.
Those
even
countries
if they
were
wanted
never
to, they can't.
Those countries were never going to join NATO, though, were they? And indeed, Ukraine, it is off the board for them to join NATO.
Well, not rhetorically it wasn't, because even in the last weeks before the war started, Jens Stoltenberg defiantly said, nobody tells us who joins NATO. We'll have whoever we want, and we still stand with the Bucharest memorandum in 2008. They will eventually join. And, of course, we said that in the Washington summit, that we still stand by that. Mark Rutte to this day still says it's still inevitable. So it has not been taken off the table rhetorically anyway.
There were negotiations back in 2014, which Putin has frankly reneged on. Surely we just expect him to do that again.
Well, what do you mean by reneged on? What did you suggest he reneged on?
Well, there were negotiations about Ukraine and, the idea that he had committed himself not to launching an invasion on Ukraine. He's now done that. So, even in the event of another settlement, surely he couldn't be trusted not to go back on his word and do it once again as he has in the past.
Well, now I think that we have to be honest and say that our Western side is certainly guilty of the same category of things, and we don't have to take Russia's word for this. We can take Jens Stoltenberg's word, who in 2023 declared that Russia offered in in the fall of 2021 that if we just took NATO off the table, then Russia would not use military force, but if we didn't, they would. And he said, of course, we didn't sign that. We didn't agree to that. So there was a chance to have this war not even start on the issue of NATO, but we didn't do it. And of course, all the stuff with the Minsk agreements, and you can make an argument that both sides didn't live up to it, but the West side especially didn't live up to the number one thing that Russia cared about, which was a change in their constitution to protect minority rights for the ethnic Russians living inside Ukraine. And of course, they had been fighting an 8-year civil war against the ethnic Russians of Ukrainian in the East. So that was all part of this mix that's going in, and we just can't avoid those if we want to try to find a way out for everybody.
But it was agreed, Daniel, though, in 2014 that Ukraine wasn't going to join NATO in exchange for Putin's promise not to invade.
I've never seen anything about that. NATO certainly doesn't agree to that, so I'm not sure what you're talking about there, but Jens Stoltenberg certainly doesn't agree to that.
Just finally, given what we've said, and it's a pretty pessimistic outlook, isn't it? This war could go on forever and ever.
Well, it really can't go on forever and ever. That's why you saw today in the Kiev Independent newspaper, they had a piece in there that says, listen, 2026 it could well be the decisive year because the Ukraine side doesn't have the manpower. Russia could go on this for years. They could, at this current level, they could go on indefinitely. According to MI6 and CIA estimates, they could go on literally for years. Ukraine can't. They're running out of men. They just don't have enough. So if we go on this war of attrition, the small side is not going to wear out the large side first, and that's just math, I'm afraid.